Hi everyone, I hope you're all doing fabulously, guys. I wanted to start playing around with using my framework for types in terms of core fantasies and subsidiary fantasies, and play around with it to see if we could give interesting first descriptions of other types than INFJs and INTJs, which have usually been the focus of my work. And I like to start with the INFP, partly because it's a type I know a little bit. I have INFPs in my family. It's a type I like, it's a type I know well. I have INFPs in my friends too. There's also been some followers of mine, some Patreon supporters of mine that have expressed an interest in me discussing FI more. So for all these reasons, I'm going to be talking about the INFP in this video, but again, through the lens of my understanding of type in terms of an interlocking framework of narrative unconscious fantasies. If you want to know more, stick through this video. I am hoping to make it good for you, but we're also doing this together, never forget that. Just let me mention briefly that the first link below is to my Patreon page. I mentioned my patrons earlier. It is true that often if you're a patron, you can come to me more easily to ask me to cover particular topics, including in deep dives. The deep dives are one of the good perks that you get for becoming a member, a Patreon supporter. It's a whole library of long format content videos where I go in depth about lots of different topics, usually based on suggestions from the patrons. And there's already a beautiful library of those and people are loving it. There's also access to our Discord server, the Frofol. Come hang out with me and the others there. It's a lovely time. It's only a few dollars or euros a month or a year. It helps me massively. I could not do this work without you, and so I'd be very grateful for your support. Now that I mentioned that, returning to the INFP, well, we know that the INFP is an FI dominant with strong NE and SI functions usually, and not so developed, not so strong TE function. Okay, so that's the usual sort of structure, repetitive structure of how we mechanically understand the INFP. And this is something that's clearly, I have been hovering around for many years until I came to the realization that, well, okay, I seem to have exhausted the possibilities of what can be explained about a particular type using the traditional model. The traditional model being not the real Jungian model, but a much more limited model, which is the Myers-Briggs model, right? Okay, it's flashier, it has the 4-letter codes and all that, and I'm still using that because a lot of people understand better what I'm referring to if I use these 4-letter codes, so I'm still doing that. But with such a mechanical repetitive model, yeah, you're going to eventually hit a brick wall and sort of run out of things to say. And sometimes we run out of things to say, not because we have said everything that could be said or thought everything that we with our, ultimately limited minds can think about. Sometimes you're just limited by the framework you're operating within. Usually you're limited by the framework you're operating within. Now let's imagine that the INFP is a type which, like the ISFP, designates a person who is moved throughout their experience, who is inclined to give meaning to their experiences in the world, primarily through the lens of an FI fantasy of emotional containment. Namely that INFPs encounter the world and make sense of things in the world primarily through the lens of the integrity of their emotional landscape, their internal emotional landscape, as well as the integrity of our internal value landscape as something that is always contained, it's in them, and that in a sense no one can really touch it, right? It's effectively protected from the outside world. Notice how different this is from the FE fantasy of emotional mirroring, where the way in which the external world, usually the social world, either mirrors or fails to mirror emotions and values can be a source of either great joy, satisfaction, or anxiety and irritation. Not so in the case of the INFP or the ISFP for that matter. Now, interestingly, we can think of the influence of the NE fantasy as I have defined it in the INFP as well. So here we're talking about, if you've been following my videos, a fantasy of unlimited seeing, in principle not being hindered in the ability to adventurously discover new things in the world, but filtered through the even higher agency of emotional containment, namely the FI fantasy. And in this case, we would then say that this narrative of emotional autonomy and containment joins up and intersects with a story of unlimited seeing. So the unlimited seeing would be mediated by emotional containment, and therefore the any drive will tend to prioritize and vibrate, like symbolically vibrate higher and more powerfully with those particular states of affairs, situations, perceptions that align with a sense of emotional contentment, and not with the threatening of that emotional buffer, and value buffer, which is so important. Now, if you establish those two facts and move to another fantasy that is likely to be quite significant in activating the life drive of the INFP, which is the SI fantasy. The SI fantasy, I have called it a fantasy of identification with the loved object, which would be something like identification with the world. So in other words, whereas in the SI dominant, this unconscious identification with the world as such is dominant, in the case of INFP, it's not dominant at all. It is very much subsidiary to FI and usually to the any unlimited seeing as well. But nevertheless, in the INFP, there is still very much a desire to say, okay, this is my corner of the world. And this is where I can retreat to. This is where I can be comfortable. This is where I can, in a sense, rest on my laurels when I need to. It's there. And you can easily see how, when combined with the fantasy of emotional containment and the fantasy of unlimited seeing, you end up having dynamics where the INFP, always prioritizing the harmony of their FI desire, engages in exploration of the world, collects new information, filters it through the FI filter, and ends up bringing it back to the comfort zone of the SI identification world, and enriches this world with more facts, more information, which we will tend to call memories. Okay? And that's how, if you blend all that together, you end up with the books of Marcel Proust, for example, which seem to be a perfect encapsulation of this kind of type and what moves the desire of this specific type. I won't go into TE because I wanted to just use the example of the three main fantasies of this type as I've described them to show you the power of this new kind of framework. And I look forward to your comments in the comment section. And by the way, if you just want to understand the INFJ better, I'm hoping someone writes books about the INFP in the same vein as my books on the INFJ. So the Ecstatic Soul, which is my book on the mind of the INFJ, inner world of the INFJ consciousness, INFJ consciousness, it's a must read if you want to understand the INFJ better. But you also have the sequel, which is the Infinite Soul, which is all about the INFJ in the world, a world the INFJ often perceived as being hostile. And this book's about how to find purpose, meaning, meaningfulness, and value in a world that is not easy for the INFJ. So these two books, as the covers indicate, go very well together. They're linked below as well. You should get them if you want to understand this type deeply. Thank you guys, and see you tomorrow.